future broadcast on our YouTube channel. However, fear not, those of you who have your cameras on, you will not be part of that recording. We have the settings set so that they only pick up those of us who are unmuted and speaking. So you will not be on YouTube. You don't need to worry about that. With that in mind, please use the chat box for any questions that you have for our author this evening. You can use the chat box at any point in the event, and we will store up your questions and ask them for you during the audience question and answer session at the end. So make liberal use of that chat box with any questions you have. And then last of all, before I turn things over to David to introduce our guests tonight, a word of thanks. It has been a long, hard, strange year for independent businesses of all kinds and for independent bookstores. And we've made it through at the Northshire bookstores. It's not been easy, but we've done what we have done thanks to all of you and to your continued support. And we could not have done it without you and without those amazing orders and visits that have continued coming in through these hard times. So thank you, truly, deeply, sincerely from us for all that you've done to sustain us through this year. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to David to introduce our guest tonight.
So much, Rachel. It's my great pleasure to welcome Norman Fischer for his new book, When You Greet Me, I Bow, Notes and Reflections from a Life in Zen, to Northshire Bookstore. Norman Fischer is a poet, author, translator, Zen Buddhist priest, and teacher. He served as abbot for the San Francisco Zen Center from 1995 to 2000. And in 2001, he founded the Everyday Zen Foundation, an organization dedicated to adapting Zen Buddhist teachings to Western culture. A beloved figure in the Buddhist world, he is well known for his efforts in interreligious dialogue. His new book, When You Greet Me, I Bow, Notes and Reflections from a Life in Zen, is a collection of essays spanning a life of inquiry into Zen practice, relationship, cultural encounter, and spiritual creativity. We are very lucky tonight to be joined by the book's editor, Cynthia Schrager. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire, Cynthia Schrager and Norman Fischer.
Thank you so much, Northshire, for hosting us. And Norman, I want to start by saying what an honor it was to edit your new volume, and just such a pleasure going on a sort of treasure hunt to find all of these essays that you had published over the last 30 years. When we first talked about this volume, you said that you didn't know exactly what you published. There was no list somewhere that I could reference, so I just kind of went off and started hunting. And I think we were both a little surprised to find that you had written more than 75 essays in various Buddhist journals like Inquiring Mind, Tricycle, Shambhala Sun, Turning Wheel. Some were online. Some were up in Sue Moon's attic in a banker's box that Sue had with all the back issues of Turning Wheel. So in the end, about half of them wound up in this book. And I just wanted to ask you, what was it like for you to re-encounter these essays, many of them after so much time had passed since they were written? And are you even still the same person who wrote these essays?
Yes. Hi, everybody. And also, I'm very happy to be here and grateful to the bookstore for inviting us. And grateful to Cynthia for really doing all the hard work involved in making this book come to be. So, yeah, it was a funny experience, right? Because I had forgotten about a lot of these essays entirely. So it was a funny experience to read something that I wrote maybe 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago or more. Literally, there's not a single cell in my body that is now in my body that was there 30 years ago. Every cell is turned over, and I'm a completely different person, although there is some illusion of continuity, I guess. So even though I didn't remember writing all these essays, I could sort of recognize my voice, and a lot of times I didn't agree with myself anymore. And there were times when I was appalled at some of the things that I said. And when I was young, I had a lot of nerve, I think. Older now, I look back and I said, wow, how did I think I knew that? And I didn't, actually, even though I thought I did at the time. So, as Cynthia knows very well, we evaluated the essays, and the ones that were really way out there that I couldn't agree with at all didn't appear in the book. And some of the ones that did appear in the book that it felt like we needed to change a little bit, we actually did do some rewriting. But the interesting thing about the process that was Cynthia's idea, actually, was to, so Cynthia did the work of taking this vast amount of stuff and seeing that there were things that I've been interested in consistently over all this time. And so she sort of defined those topics and divided the essays into batches. And so then she came up with the great idea of my writing new material as an introduction. That's the notes part, you know, notes on each of the sections, so that I could have a chance to reflect on all the essays in that section from the point of view of late 2020 when I did that new writing. So that was a really interesting exercise, and it might be that the most interesting part of the book is the four, I guess it's 4 or 5 mini, they're not really essays because they're very informal notes introducing each section, in which I got a chance to really reflect on the question that Cynthia is now asking. And it's a funny thing. I remember, you know, like I was a student at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop long ago, and one of my teachers was a brilliant prose writer named Gina Berriault, who was a real treasure writer of the San Francisco Bay Area. And she and I were very close, and she was a brilliant person and extremely, extremely shy. And I remember her saying to me, "It is so embarrassing being an author, because you write stuff, and if you write truly, you know, you're really exposing yourself. And it's like, you know, you're naked and the whole world can see you, you know, and it's very embarrassing." And so she found it like a horrible experience to publish a book because she was so embarrassed to do it, you know, but you have to do it if you're an author, you know, so, and you want to do it, but at the same time it's very embarrassing. Well, when she said that to me, I thought, that's weird. I didn't feel that way at all, you know. I was happy to write stuff. I didn't even notice, you know, what happened when it was published. But going back and reading all these essays, I saw what she meant. You know, it is very embarrassing, you know, to express yourself in front of people, and then they get to see what you are saying and who you are, and then in the privacy of their own room, they get to say, like, what a jerk this guy is. You know, what the hell is he talking about? He doesn't know anything, you know, stuff like that. And you can't even say anything about it, you know, because you don't even know that they're doing that. So I could feel all that, you know, in going through these essays again. And, but, you know, what are you going to do? Everybody has to endure something, I guess.
We're grateful that you allowed us to revisit these essays after so many years, because I think on the whole, at least my experience was one of delight in finding them. And I agree with you, the notes that you've written are one of the most marvelous things about the book. Your opportunity to sort of reflect back on what you said, what you thought about what you said, how you feel now. And they're really personal, they're informal, they're intimate. And I definitely want to invite you to read a little bit from the notes. There's 4 sections of the book. The first one is relationship, and that's where the title essay, "When You Greet Me, I Bow," is from. The second grouping is on thinking, writing, and emptiness. And originally, when I was looking at Norman's essays, there was sort of a natural grouping of essays that was about the emptiness teachings, grief, and permanence. And then there seemed to be another natural grouping of essays that were about Norman's views on language, imagination, and poetry. Of course, Norman is a published poet, a prolific poet. He has 2 volumes out right now that just came out of his poetry in addition to this book. And after I was reading these two sets of essays, I started to think, oh, maybe it makes sense to put these together, because it sort of started to seem to me that for Norman, they weren't really two separate things. They were really one thing. And so, and he wrote a note to this section where he talks about the connection between these things, thinking, writing, and emptiness. And so, Norman, would you like to read a little bit from this note?
Yeah, sure. You can see we planned this in advance because look, I'm
You
right.
just have to know exactly which page.
I'm right there. How do you like that? The book just automatically opened up to
Maybe
that.
you should show the cover. I don't know if everyone's seen the cover.
The cover of this book looks like this. I had great resistance to this cover because, see that?
That's great.
Yeah, that's actually the other half of my face, and I
Yeah.
didn't really like the idea of putting my face on the cover, but so we compromised, and they only put half of my face on the cover. Anyway, I'll read that part that Cynthia is referring to. This is sort of in the midst of my section of notes on the part of the book that's called Thinking, Writing, and Emptiness. And you'll see how these things are connected. People think of the Buddhist emptiness teachings as being abstruse or scary. But to me, they're friendly and light as air. They say that life's heaviness and the suffering that naturally occurs because of that heaviness is a pernicious and persistent illusion. Life isn't heavy. We don't need to suffer in the way that we think we do. It's hard to accept this. Human beings seem to have a long-term love affair with personal suffering. As much as we complain about it and seek all sorts of remedies, we come back to it again and again because it seems so real to us and so important. We are like tragically codependent lovers who can't stop coming back to a toxic relationship no matter how many times it hurts us. I have heard of brain research showing that we're hardwired to react much more strongly to drama and difficulty than to peace and easefulness, though we think we are trying to avoid the former and develop the latter. I recently saw a Facebook post about Rwanda that, like all Facebook posts, may or may not be true, but it has a ring of truth to it. The post said that in response to the trauma of the genocide that happened there, people went outside and decided that they would spend a lot of time in the sun. They also did a lot of communal rituals involving singing and dancing. Then the Western therapists came to help. The therapists had them sit individually in small, dim rooms and encouraged them to recount again and again, in detail, the terrible things they had witnessed. The Rwandan people did not see this as a reasonable way to cope, so they sent the well-meaning therapists home. Maybe they were in denial. I don't know. Certainly, our culture would say they were in denial. But who knows? In any case, the emptiness teachings don't offer solutions to problems we must solve. They tell us that these problems are illusions, in the sense that they're not as they appear to be. This doesn't deny that we can solve problems, and it doesn't try to brush off our problems as unreal or trivial. What it does do is it radically takes the edge off our desperation. As I write in these essays, the emptiness teachings are an extension of the teachings on impermanence, and impermanence is Buddha. And Buddha is love. Things don't last. They're changing every minute. You could either freak out about this or embrace it and realize that impermanence makes everything precious In this section of the book, as in the last, I write about my dear friend, my second rabbi, Rabbi Alan Liu, who died all of a sudden in 2009. I still miss him and feel in touch with him, and he is not the only dear friend that I have lost. At this point in my life, loss is basic. It is literally with me every single day. Who can avoid loss? To deeply reflect on and practice the emptiness teachings is to realize that loss is tender, that loss is love, and the more loss there is, the more love there is. And so, after all these years, it has turned out that the philosophical urges that plunged me into Zen practice were really leading me back to the most basic of all human emotions: love, simple decency, and kindness. The emptiness teachings also shade necessarily into questions of language and imagination, two other topics I seem to have been thinking about all my life. In the emptiness text, it says, "Things are mere designations. They are not, as we think they are, really existing independent entities. So we better question our designations, question our words, and resituate ourselves in relation to them." This is unavoidably my approach to poetry, odd as it may seem to some. To be aware of the fact in writing words that this is what's going on, the writing of words. Which phenomenon is prior to anything one thinks to say in relation to the experience or thing the words propose to relate to? We are language-created creatures. What does that feel like in the midst of the process of language making, which is self-making? There is something supremely ironic about this task, this writing of a poetry, or indeed essays or essay notes, that is at all points shot through with holes, and not to be taken seriously as actually referring to something real outside the words themselves and the experience of understanding them. So I realize in reading that might seem like weird or abstruse to you. I don't know if you could follow that. But it's sort of like how I feel about it. It's actually like a feeling that I have. I'm always aware of my language and how I'm making myself and my world with my language, as we all are. So anyway, that's not in the text. I just said that. Back to the text. It seems to me that all uses of language, including almost all thinking, produce imaginary thoughts and experiences. All language is an act of the imagination. We imagine, through our words and ideas, a world we can live in. We literally imagine ourselves and one another. And then we think about and write about this imaginary world. It's in some ways wonderful, and in other ways dismaying, that over these last few centuries of maximum comprehension and manipulation of the physical world, humans have invested so much in the scientific, materialistic worldview that we have forgotten that it's a worldview and not a solid fact. So I say here parenthetically, when I say this, I'm not, of course, denying scientific fact, which is a basic, cornerstone of modern life. I'm examining only the unexamined philosophical assumptions behind it that we all unconsciously share. End of parenthetical note. And in doing this, we have not only put ourselves and so many other creatures of the planet in jeopardy, we have also forgotten how to dream and wonder, how to believe in stories and myths in their true power. If things are empty, it means they are wide open. The great Mahayana Buddhist sutras that I so much love to read are all either about the emptiness teachings or assume the emptiness teachings, are written with enormous, expansive extravagance for the purpose of loosening our grip on reality, which is to say, expanding us in feeling and view much, much further than the eye can see. And in my previous Dharma book, it's all about, this imaginative aspect of spiritual practice. What's the name of it? The World Could Be Otherwise. Imagination, something. Imagination and the Bodhisattva Path. Yeah. So it's all about imagination. So here I kind of tie that together as a head note to the section on thinking and writing and emptiness. So you see how they're connected. Yeah, that's it. There it is. The World Could Be Otherwise. And while we're holding up covers, here are the two recent poetry books of mine. There Was a Clattering As and Nature. These are this came out in March, this came out in late April, and I bet you that Northshire Books can order them for you. We're not talking about them tonight particularly, but
Well, I was going to ask you, Norman, maybe to talk a little bit about these two types of writing that you do that are so radically different. I mean, your poetry is just a completely different voice, style of writing, approach to language than your essays on Zen. And I just wonder how you experience that. Are they linked for you in your mind? Do they just feel completely radically discontinuous? Does your sense of the community that you're writing for, say when you're writing poetry versus when you're writing Zen essays, are they completely different communities? Are they overlapping communities?
well, that's a great question. And this is something that's evolved a lot over my lifetime, because in the beginning they were two totally separate things, separate relationships, separate communities. And I never mentioned although it was everybody knew, I never mentioned my life in Zen practice in my writing world and vice versa. But as time has gone on, the two have converged quite a bit, to the point where now they almost overlap. There's not that much difference, even though the texts seem quite different. And in fact, that's true in the world in general. Dharma practice has bled into the world on a lot of different levels. Sometimes it doesn't identify itself as Dharma practice, but the ideas of Buddha Dharma is all over the place. You can't look anywhere in our contemporary culture without finding Dharma-related ideas, however much they're not explicitly Dharma, or however much people who espouse them don't even know they come from Dharma. So these things are overlapping. But here's the main thing. When I'm writing a Dharma talk or a Dharma presentation or a Dharma essay, I am very much aware of my audience. Because practicing with people for so long, I have a sense of, who practices Buddhism. And it's not just who practices Buddhism, it's like human beings. I got to know people a lot, pretty well, right? Over 40, 50 years of practicing Buddhism with people. It's a very intimate practice, right? So you get to know people really well on a much deeper level than just social or casual. So I kind of am talking to someone's in my Dharma text. But in my poetry, I'm almost not talking to anybody. I mean, I know I am, because all writing is talking to somebody. And that's, as soon as you start, as soon as there's any language, there's always somebody there listening. even if you're all by yourself in the middle of nowhere and you start talking, somebody there is listening, because the person that's listening is already there in the words. Because the words wouldn't be in your head if there weren't people who talk to you with those words. That's so when you say the words, even if nobody's around, they're there. So in that sense, yes, I have an audience in my poetry, but I'm not worried about the audience. I just 100% assume that the audience will understand. So I don't have to explain. I can just take the top off my head and just let the writing write itself. So my poetry is wildly improvised and totally intuitive and serendipitous. And so maybe somebody who's reading my text might say, what is going on here a lot of the time? Because it doesn't seem to, like, one thing doesn't seem to follow from the other. Just like in actual life, one thing doesn't follow from the other. The fact that it seems to is kind of, the grand illusion that keeps us going. So in poetry, I don't practice that illusion. I just forget about it and write. So that's why, in a way, I don't like to recommend my poetry, because I'm aware of poems that are quoted in Dharma talks. My poems are not quotable in Dharma talks. They are Dharma talks, but they're not quotable in Dharma talks. Like, I don't write poems like Mary Oliver or somebody like that you can quote in Dharma talks. Those are great poems. I'm not complaining about it, but I just don't write that poem. So that's why I don't recommend my books, because somebody might say, oh, Zen, probably it'll be all about like nature, and it is about nature, but it'll be all about like, the quiet stream and this and that. But no, it will disappoint you if you think it's that. Now, one other footnote to all this is that there's also a difference, between my Dharma books and my Dharma essays. I mean, my Dharma talks, and a lot of the books, like the book that you held up a minute ago, what was the name of it again? The World Could Be Otherwise. Yeah, The World Could Be Otherwise. That book is a Dharma book that comes out of Dharma talks and Dharma teachings. It's kind of like a teaching book with little exercises of practices you can do and stuff like that. That's a different thing from this book, because in this book, I'm not trying to encourage people to practice or help them to practice. I'm thinking about the practice. I'm thinking about the practice and its position in the world, and its position in our culture and in our lives. And that's a different thing. So these essays are sort of more thoughtful and a little bit more theoretical. I mean, I'm never abstract. I'm never, I hope anyway, too much in the clouds. I'm always thinking about what this means to us. But it does, we are all of us part of a culture, part of a world. And so in these essays, I'm thinking through what is Buddhism and Buddhist practice doing in this world, and how does it work, and how does it influence us, and how do we understand it, and what use can we make of it. So this is a little bit different kind of a book from a practice book.
And it is an incredibly wide-ranging book, because it goes into all of the different essays that Norman had written. I mean, they cover an enormous range of topics. And I want to kind of turn a little bit to the last section of the book, which is about engaged Buddhism, or sort of the relationship of Buddhism to social activism. And I think for a lot of people, especially people who don't practice Buddhism or haven't had much of an encounter with Buddhism, they may think of Buddhism as kind of a withdrawal from the world. The monk goes off to the mountain, or we're sitting on cushions facing the wall and doing all kinds of strange behaviors. But so many of your essays, and they comprise the last section of the book, deal directly with issues of social justice, of social engagement. You talk about racial injustice, you talk about political conflicts, you talk about our global climate catastrophe. And I think a lot of us, wonder what difference can a contemplative practice such as Buddhism possibly make when confronting something, say, for example, as huge and alarming as our climate crisis. And you have a lot to say about that. So I wanted to maybe invite you to read a little bit more from the book, from the notes section on the last section, difference in Dharma. And then maybe you can talk to us a little bit about what Buddhism has to teach us about how to make the world better.
Yeah, thanks, Cynthia. Yeah, that's a whole important subject, right? I mean, in our Western tradition, we have the prophetic voice, right? That calls us to action in the face of injustice. You don't have that tradition or that voice in the East and in Buddhism, but you do have a call to universal compassion. So that's a little bit different. And so that's why I think it is, first of all, really important that we have in our current multiplicity of crises, which is probably one crisis with multiple aspects, we don't really have or pay enough attention to a religious voice, a spirituality voice. We're so obsessed with objective solutions, which of course we need, obviously, but we're so focused on that that we're not listening to the voice of spirituality, which we need to listen to, because that's part of the solution to our problems, is a spiritual turning toward more compassion and universal belonging. But in the context of that, I think there's a specific contribution that Buddhism can make, exactly because it doesn't have the prophetic voice that we have in our culture and that is needed. It offers something else. And so that's what I'm always trying to explore as I talk about these things. So that's a whole topic in itself. But let me read the part that Cynthia is referring to. This is toward the end. This is the last page and a half or so of the section called Notes on Social Engagement. This is the writing that I just did recently for this book. I mentioned climate change in these essays. I forgot that I have been concerned about it since the early 1970s. Remember Jimmy Carter wearing a sweater in the White House? Some of you are old enough to remember this. Jimmy Carter wore a sweater in the White House. There were long lines at all the gasoline stations because there was a sudden shortage of oil. And Jimmy Carter said, right, we shouldn't be burning so much oil. We're killing the planet. And he installed solar panels on the roof of the White House. Does anybody remember that? Jimmy Carter was like a great president and a prophetic hero of American politics, which is why now he's considered the great failure, right? Jimmy Carter is like universally understood as a great failure, even though he was a great hero, in my opinion. Anyway, Ronald Reagan got elected and he said, no, everything is just fine. There's no environmental problem. What's wrong with this Jimmy Carter? He's just a depressed guy. And the first thing Reagan did was remove the solar panels from the White House roof. So we knew that in 1972. We were saying, oh my God, it's an emergency. I forgot that I was thinking about it that long ago. And the reason why I forgot is because now the concern that I have about environmentalism is so powerful that it's almost of a different order. How is it possible that we have succeeded all these years in being so casual about an emergency whose consequences are so drastic? As of this moment, and I'm writing, I think, before last November's election, I think, as of this moment, it seems that we have the know-how and the economic capacity to completely eliminate the burning of fossil fuels on our planet within a matter of decades, which it seems we must do if we are going to avoid the worst and most nightmarish scenarios of climate dystopia. Our rhetoric is heating up quickly, which is a good thing, but so far serious action is not following, not to anything like the extent and the speed needed. I have hope, however, that this will change. And in fact, it changed the day after the election. And President Biden is doing him great. Nobody expected that his climate policy, at least on paper, would be as far-reaching and progressive as it is, and it's really great. However, it hasn't actually been operationalized. So we'll see what happens, but the whole conversation and the whole mood has shifted, and that's really great. Doesn't say that here, but I'm saying that now. Back to the text. The Buddhist teaching of karma tells us with great, and I do not think misplaced, confidence that good actions bring good results, bad actions bring bad results, and that the network of good-bad causality is so vast that no one and no computer model can ever hope to encompass it. So that's why we do not know, we cannot know what will happen in the future. But we can have confidence that no matter what, good is good, and that as Buddhist practitioners who follow the teaching that emphasizes compassion, we have to do good and avoid doing bad stuff, and that good will bring benefit to others, and bad stuff will definitely cause bad consequences. In this sense, Buddhist teaching, basic Buddhist teaching, proposes political and social activism as a total life project. I think it's the heart of Buddhist practice. If you believe, as I do, that climate change is an urgent issue, and if you can take to the streets to stop a new pipeline or coal-fired plant, you should do that, or support those who do that. You should write letters, picket politicians and business owners, exerting pressure, but not with bitterness, with love. And yes, whatever your position, you should vote. And I'm writing this like before last November. Vote, vote, vote. And make sure candidates and office holders do the right thing. But the category of good political and social action is larger than specifically political acts. Good political and social action is also a smile, a word of encouragement, a moment of gratitude and appreciation. It's political to promote kindness and fairness among people in big ways and small ways. Political action is prayer, meditation. It's the radical moment of peace without doing anything or thinking anything. And there's no person from the age of 0 to 99 and beyond who is not capable of practicing and obligated to practice political and social action in this widest of all senses. We all have to do this. And if, as may well be the case, we are in for hard times, politically, socially, environmentally, we will really, really need such good action more than ever to ensure that humanity will be able to meet the challenges ahead with a good spirit rather than with hatred and strife. So, we were always, from the start, doomed, right, to perish from the face of the earth. Isn't that true? The earth is not eternal. Never was. Nobody ever thought it was. The sun burns out sometime, and the earth can't support life anymore. So that was always going to happen. The question is, how fast does it happen? And also, how does it happen? So if we're in for hard times and we love one another, right? And we're inspired by one another, and we know how to sing and dance and be in the sun and do beautiful things together, we can be okay. If, on the other hand, things go bad, and then because things went bad, we start blaming each other and shooting at each other and burning each other up, and every one of us taking to our gated enclaves behind barbed wires with our rifles and our safety rations, you know, this is the worst possible outcome. So that's why, really, it's a political act to promote and practice kindness, to look at yourself and see, like, where am I being unkind? And I got to stop doing that to myself and everybody else. I've got to prepare for a time when we're going to need each other. We were almost doing that in the pandemic, right? When everybody all of a sudden realized, oh wait, essential workers. We should be respecting them. They make our lives work. We sort of forgot about that. But in the beginning, we were cheering. Remember that? For the essential workers. And also we were realizing that taking care of myself is taking care of others. When others take care of themselves, they're taking care of me. That's one of the lessons the pandemic should have taught us. And I think now that we're getting more back to normal in some parts of the country, mostly around the country, we're forgetting that. But those are the lessons we should have learned. And they're really, really important. And those are political acts to remember those things. Okay, that's all. I think it's time to do something different.
We're encouraging people from our audience to ask questions too. I don't know if there are any audience questions that Northshire wants to bring out.
No questions yet, but please type any questions you might have in the chat box, and Rachel and I will pose them for you. But I have a question for you, Norman. When I was writing the introduction, I noticed that you had a book. One of your many books is about experimental writing and spiritual practice, as a spiritual practice. And I was hoping that you could expand a little bit about that, and I guess with imagination as well.
Yeah, are you thinking of my book, Experience?
Yes, that's what.
Experience, Thinking, Writing, Language, and Religion. Yeah, that's almost like a companion volume to this one, because that's all my collected essays over a 30-year period about writing and imagination as it relates to spiritual practice. And this is about, spiritual practice. There is some overlap, and so there actually are a few essays that appear in both books. But that one focuses on writing, and this one focuses on spiritual practice. Yes, I think that, nowadays, actually, there's a lot of people who practice. There's so many writers now, right? There's so many outlets for writing, and so many people are writing. And people are realizing, for example, that writing in a journal is a spiritual practice. And there's the great work of my friend, longtime friend and pal, Natalie Goldberg, who teaches this methodology of just writing spontaneously and letting the language flow without your controlling it, and thereby discovering something. In a sense, I'm doing that in my poetry, although in that case, it's in a tradition, and I'm informed by that tradition. But doing it just openly is a form of writing that opens up the imagination and gives you access to your heart. So in a lot of the work that I do classical Zen teaching mostly, but sometimes I do various other kinds of things in which we've discovered that to find out about who you are and what's going on in you and what you need for your life, you find out something different if you sit in silence, if you engage in kind of a controlled and intense dialogue with another person or persons, conversation, so to speak, but in a way that's, not social and chit-chat, but focused. And you discover something still different if you do writing. So writing as a means of self-development, self-understanding, and the opening of the imagination is a very powerful tool that I think people are discovering in all over the place now. And so if you go, I bet you, I will bet you that if I go into your bookstore, both of them, there'll be a rack of blank books. Am I right? Journals, books with no words in them, right?
There's a whole wall of them.
Yes, right. So you can write your own words. And you wouldn't have them in there if people weren't buying them, and they wouldn't be buying them if they weren't filling them up with words. So, yes, people are writing, and it's a wonderful thing. There's so many poets now that there are famous poets, famous, that I've never heard of, because they're famous in some sphere of poetry that I'm unaware of. There's a million spheres of poetry, a million poetry worlds, and a million worlds for fiction, and a million worlds for memoir, and so many books published that I don't know how you even decide, if you're a bookstore owner, that you should give a whole lecture on how do you figure out which books that you have in your store and which books you ignore or you probably don't even know about most of the books that are published, It's overwhelming. We are all yakking at one another, and we all can't wait to talk, and we all can't wait to write and speak because our imaginations are bursting open. Because we know we're in crisis. Maybe we know we're coming to a new phase of humanity. Being human, is coming to a new position. So we have a lot to say to one another now. It's quite something, isn't it? So I find that meditation practice, when I was a young writer, before I started doing Zen practice, I had a dilemma, which a lot of writers have, which is I thought I was doing the writing. And so my contradictory and convoluted thoughts about myself were a great hindrance to my writing. When I started doing Zen practice, I realized I'm not really doing the writing. I'm just a vehicle for it. So I can get out of the way and let it happen. So in that sense, spiritual practice does that for you, right? It helps you to get out of your own way. And I think it really enables more freedom of expression, whatever your art form is, whether it's the written word or some other form. It helps you to free yourself up so that your work can take care of you instead of you thinking you're making the work.
That's lovely. Thank you. There's a great question here from Todd in the chat asking, what are the 3 most important things to do in the current circumstances? And what are the 3 most important things not to do?
That's a great question. I guess I can see Todd. Is it Todd Finley? Yeah, I'm seeing Todd. He looks just like me with the same white beard and everything. Which I don't usually have a white beard, only when I don't shave. But then I shave, so I usually am shaven clean. But the pandemic has caused me to grow hair all over the place, and then I shave it, Anyway, the 3 things to do and the 3 things not to do, is that what you said? Yes, well, I don't have good advice for anybody. I don't know what anybody should do, because everybody's in a different position, right? I don't know what position you're in, Todd. I mean, like in my position, I should like talk about climate change because I have a format for talking, and I want to remind people about that. And anybody who has a format for talking, whether it's publicly or to your friends, should talk about these issues and talk about them in a humane way. Now we have, it seems, a media atmosphere and an online atmosphere in which you can't really say anything. Like after the 2016 election, I felt that it was my responsibility to talk about our new president in such a way that we could cope with him better. So I started making Facebook posts. And it took me about a month or less than a month to realize that I couldn't say anything because that medium automatically changed what I was saying and made it different. Same words, but it was different in that medium. So it's very hard to actually say anything now publicly easier privately, where we could see each other's faces and talk to one another. So I think we should talk about it among our friends, and in any other way we can find out, with the recognition that public speaking now just becomes interpreted in a way that maximizes polarization. There are no poles here. Everybody's in the same boat. All the things about this side versus that side and all this crazy stuff is completely manufactured and untrue. There's nobody that doesn't feel the same way fundamentally about the things that matter here. Really. The stuff that people are yelling about is nonsense. You know, not that we don't need to quiet some things and emphasize other things, but really and truly it's distracting. So we need to talk to one another is one thing. And then, you know, I mean, voting and being, you know, making sure that people who are elected to office are doing the right thing, as I said in my piece, is very important. And then in whatever way we can be of service, we should do that. And create an example for other people of kindness. I think it's a radical thing to be kind and to think that kindness is important, really, really important. Nobody thinks kindness is important, you know? But to be a person who demonstrates all the time that kindness is actually the most important thing. It's more important than how much money you have. It's more important than how much influence you have. It's more important than anything. To demonstrate that, I think, is a radical thing to do. So those are some things that have come on the top of my head. And you know, and so avoid getting mad at people, avoid trashing people. When you start hating your enemies, ask yourself, what the hell am I doing? You know, what is this doing for me? There's a wonderful Buddhist thing about this. I think it's from Tibetan Buddhism. It says something like, if you want to throw shit at somebody, you have to like pick up a handful of shit, you know, and then you throw it at them and probably you miss and you get it all over yourself, you know. So that's true, you know, with our efforts to yell at people and scream at people. I mean, we're hurting ourselves way more. They don't care, right? In fact, they're happy. They're thrilled that they got us screaming. So we haven't done anything against them. All we've done is like messed up ourselves, and now we got to take a shower and go back to our meditation cushions and so on and so forth. So I think stuff like that. You know, nobody knows. It's a scary thought and also a beautiful thought. Nobody knows what's going to happen. And nobody knows how we're going to get out of this. Nobody knows. So that's why, you know, in general, we just have to sort of revolutionize our lives. Each one of us have to revolutionize our life in the direction of kindness, generosity, compassion, and being willing to sacrifice anything. Raise my taxes. It's okay, you know. Do some good with the money. Raise my taxes. It's all right. Take away half my stuff. I'm okay with that. If it's not all going to the... You know what the biggest black box on the planet is? The American defense budget. It's a huge, huge budget. It's like more than half of I don't know, but way big part of our government expenditures. Nobody knows what's in that budget, and nobody can question it. Did you ever hear of imagine a politician saying, let's cut the defense budget in half. There's probably a lot of fat in there, and take all that money and fight climate disaster. Do you think anybody, they couldn't even think that, let alone say it, even though it could be done. Because I've had some things to do with the military, and when I've gone into meetings with them, I'm overwhelmed with the vastness of the establishment. The soldiers are like, for every soldier, there's probably like 50 other functionaries paid by the government to do this and that, to support the soldiers and our totally failed efforts to like straighten out the rest of the world. So anyway, we have to radically change our government, our personal lives, our financial lives, and everything in the direction of just like sanity, basic sanity. The world is literally insane if you were to dispassionately think about it. The things that people are doing on a daily basis are pretty crazy. And this needs to be different. But nobody knows how to make it different other than the collective of us revolutionizing ourselves, talking about that revolution to everybody around us, and as much as we can do it, letting that go filter to the top, because the top is not going to save us down. It's probably going to be both top down and bottom up. So we all have a big responsibility, I think, and it's a beautiful vision, right? That we can do this together. So thanks, Todd.
I think we are just about out of time, but I think this goes well into the last question we have time for, which is from Kristen's, from Kristen. She says, how does one practice kindness with those who want to argue that climate change is a hoax? Or anyone like that?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing to do, what I would do, because I have good friends and relatives who feel that way, and so the first thing I would do is like ask them about their kids. How are your children and grandchildren doing? And how are you? And are you okay? And how's your life? And then if you start to talk, in other words, develop a relationship with such a person of caring and kindness. And then if you get around to that topic, you can ask them, why do they think that there is no climate change? Why do they think that way? And what's behind that? Like, why do you feel that way? What's behind that? And how do you feel about it? I think it's really good to ask them, because once you start debating about facts, you'll start noticing that they'll have a lot of facts, so-called facts, about why there's no climate change. Now they don't say that anymore, actually. There's no more climate change denial. What they say is everybody now agrees, I think, even the climate deniers 10 years ago that they would deny climate change. Now they say there is climate change, but they'll say either it's not so bad, or they'll say maybe it'll be a good thing, or they'll say it's not caused by human activity, or they'll say it is caused by human activity, but what can we do? We have to have an economy. So there's no use debating facts, because what's gone on, this is what I was talking about the polarity in the public sphere, is that we now have alternate facts. So as soon as you start debating facts, you will cite your sources, they will cite theirs. They will have plenty of sources and plenty of facts that are not, in my opinion, facts, but never mind. So there's no use debating the facts. It's much better to say, how do you feel about this? What's your feeling about it? And then they say, I feel fine about it. I don't think really there's much of a problem. And then you can say, well, I'm really scared. I'm glad you don't think there's much of a problem. Good for you, but I'm really scared. Here's how I feel. And then you can tell them how scared you are for your children, your grandchildren, and how scared you are about what the world's going to be like in 20 or 30 years. And they'll say, well, don't worry, it's not going to happen. And you'll say, well, I hope you're right. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it turned out that all the science, it could be, some miraculous thing that the scientists are all wrong and we're all wrong. I hope you're right, but I don't think so. So that's a conversation you could have. I just made up a conversation that you could have with a climate denying person. That would be a very pleasant and beautiful conversation. Just don't get involved in the facts debate, because that's been debased. There are no more facts, there's only the toxic debate. So that's how I think we have to do it. Everybody's, like my friends who are climate deniers are actually pretty decent people. They're really good people, in fact. They care about their families. They're in my family, right? And they care about my relatives, and I care about their relatives, So it's not like these are like horrible people, right? Sometimes, there are horrible people, to be sure, but they're rare. You have to, they're precious, because you have to look far to find a really rotten person, To find a terrible person, you have to look far. You can't even be sure to find them in a prison. Most of the people in the prison are not even terrible, right? So most people who have what we would consider to be terrible and toxic views are not terrible people. So we can talk to them, because they're like us. Exactly, pretty much like us.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful event. Norman, Cynthia, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, I think so too. It's really nice to talk to you. We had a great conversation before everybody showed up. The four of us, Cynthia and me and David and Rachel, had a great conversation. And so it's been a wonderful evening, although it's afternoon for us in California. But it's been great to talk to everybody. I hope I meet everybody again and actually in real person meetings.
Too.
Yes,
Well,
yes, very much.
you can order When You Greet Me, I Bow from Northshire at the link in the chat. Have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody. Take care of yourselves. I'm bowing to you now because we greeted each other. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Norman. Bye.